the primary reason for defense forces and also Indian Air Force is deterrence. That is to avoid war. I remember I was a DG Air Ops when Nepal earthquake took place. Me and my staff, we didn't sleep for 2 or 3 days. We were coordinating the activities, and the first Indian Air Force aircraft got airborne within 3 hours and 50 minutes with the relief material. You said 2 or 3 fronts. My theory is this 2 plus 2 front. As far as China is concerned, the moment external threats, that is the main threat or the main challenge. Pakistan is basically irritant. They are plugging all the gaps and they are marching ahead at a very rapid pace. In Doklam also, you noticed, they will bring in the strategic bomber ahead in front of the frontier fields. Okay, and in open, we have this debate going on gun versus butter. Where do we spend more, on development or on the military? And we have learned a lesson, harder way. I think in last 1 year, if you've not learned the lesson, I think we'll have mud on our face in future.
Hello and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Adi Achint. Today I'm proud and privileged to be joined by Air Marshal Anil Khosla. Air Marshal Anil Khosla, PVSM, AVSM, VM, ADC, is a retired Air Force officer who served as the 41st Vice Chief of Air Staff. He has clocked over 4,000 hours on different aircraft like the Jaguar, the MiG-21 and the Kiran. He has experience in both ground attack, air defense roles and specializes in the maritime domain. And as I just learned from the Air Marshal that he is also a China specialist. We will keep the China dialogues for a little bit further down the line, but today I'm here to talk to him about India's air power and air operations. Thank you, sir, for joining me this afternoon and to share your expertise on the subject. It'll be really nice to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Adi. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on some of the vital issues. And you're most welcome anytime.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I'll start the discussion in a very broad-based question, which will say, how would you categorize? Because to a layman, when they look at the threats that we are getting, there's one from the Pakistani side, one from the Chinese side. And of course, there is also a threat that we are now realizing is from the maritime domain. So it's a three-front sort of a threat that we are facing. How would you categorize the air power in India today, sir? And I'd just like your opinion on the present-day scenario.
Okay, Adi, very pertinent question. Everyone keeps asking, okay, so many challenges are there, how many threats are there, and how are we geared up to handle that, and how is the Air Force, and keeps coming in the news, the fighter strength is low. The question arises, are we capable of, or we have enough capability to deal with all these threats? So that is a very pertinent question. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll take some time on this first question. And basically, there are 3 things which we need to know before I answer the question of actual capability. One is that what is expected out of the Indian Air Force? Very little is known. A common person feels it's just a fighter flying, do a couple of sorties, drop few bombs here and there, and that's it. Well, that's not it. There's a lot more to it. So what is expected out of us? That is one. That is out of Indian Air Force. The second part is, what is the environment are we working in? What is the geopolitical situation? What is the situation with the neighbors? What is the overall aspirations of our adversaries? Who are the friends? Who are adversaries? What sort of environment is it? Then third comes the capability. So I'll just deal with it one by one. As far as first part is concerned, expectations out of the Air Force. One is wartime. So general consensus is, okay, in wartime, to orchestrate air warfare. But the primary reason for defense forces and also Indian Air Force is deterrence. That is to avoid war. Okay, you should be strong enough to avoid war. That is your primary job. If the war is thrust upon you, thereafter it becomes that how do we orchestrate air warfare. And also, while orchestrating air warfare, we need to integrate with the sister services, that is the Army and the Navy, to have a synergetic effort towards the adversary. Okay, so while in war you have various campaigns as far as air warfare is concerned, starting with intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, then counter-air operations, that is ground attack and taking the control of the air, then the air defense campaign, then the CSFO. CSFO is Counter Surface Force Operations in support of sister services, which has two components. BAS and interdiction, that is battlefield airstrike and interdiction. These are various campaigns. Then there is combat search and rescue. Then there's strategic strikes, strategic targets of the adversary. Then the maritime domain, as you mentioned. Then there is space operations. I mean, there's a whole gambit of it. It's not just one-odd bomber getting airborne and dropping weapons and coming back. So I will not go into detail. It's not a theoretical class as such. Well, in the peacetime, Indian Air Force does a lot. Like you will be hearing in the COVID, every day news is coming, C-17s bringing in oxygen concentrators, oxygen tanks, oxygen equipment, medical equipment from all over the world, from Singapore, Thailand, from, all parts of the world. So that is all peacetime work. So peacetime also, Indian Air Force is involved in a big way. Okay. So what are the peacetime activities? One is military diplomacy, doing joint exercises with friendly countries, visits abroad, then cooperative activities, that is in the realm of defense and Indian Air Force. That is military diplomacy in the peacetime. Sending signals to the adversary, okay, like this Malabar exercise, which is formation of Quad and increased activity with the Quad members. That's all part of the military diplomacy. Then most important part of the Indian Air Force in peacetime is HADR. That is human assistance and disaster relief. Both man-made as well as natural, earthquakes, floods, fires, riots. It's a big way. Indian Air Force is the first responder. I remember I was at DG Air Ops when Nepal earthquake took place. Me and my staff, we didn't sleep for 2 or 3 days. We were coordinating the activities, and the first Indian Air Force aircraft got airborne within 3 hours and 50 minutes with the relief material. That is the kind of response we have. In earthquake, tsunami, fire, Bambi bucket operations you have heard in the news. And it's not only in India, abroad also. Then aid to civil agencies, like this COVID time comes under that category. If you remember when demonetization took place, Indian Air Force ferried a whole lot of currency from various places. Okay, so that all, then disaster, when strikes, Indian diaspora is all over the world. Their evacuation, if you remember, a couple of cases 2-3 years back, major evacuation exercise took place.
Yes, sir.
Then, so then we have support to other agencies like Indian Army, maintaining their forward posts with rations and equipment, the people who are deployed forward where there's no road connectivity by air, by helicopters, and, taking NDRF, then paramilitary, then that NDRF is a disaster relief formation, then NSG, wherever required, Air Force takes them. So, aid to or support to other agencies also is peacetime. So these are all activities so we have to be capable to undertake all these tasks. That is why I brought in all this. Now comes the second part, threats. You said 2 or 3 fronts. My theory is it is 2 plus 2 front. So 2 fronts are Western adversary and the Northern adversary, Pakistan and China. Okay. And other 2 fronts are internal security. Well, we have a big role to play as far as internal security is concerned. Insurgency in the north, insurgency in the east, Naxalism, the central red corridor. Okay, so that is the 3rd front. And 4th is the man-made disaster like COVID situation at the moment. Okay, so we have 4 fronts at the moment, 2 plus 2. That is where we are operating in. As far as China is concerned, at the moment, external threats, that is the main threat or the main challenge. Pakistan is basically irritant. Okay, but their collusive threat is a bigger issue. And they're colluding with each other, cooperating with each other. Pakistan is becoming a stooge of China. Whatever China says, it does. In recent last year incident also in Galwan and all these places, if you remember, Pakistan started, rattling his saber as and when China asked him to. So that is a collusive part of it. Okay, internal security, I'll not go into pandemic, we have talked about enough. So these are the environment we are operating. Okay, now why I covered environment? See, reason is that to make sure that we are ready for all these, to give a guidance to the Air Force for preparation, you need to have a multi-domain capability. Okay, not only to the Air Force as a nation, air, land, sea, then cyber, nuclear, and space, all domains. Then secondly, you have to be ready for all type of operations, some conventional, like the Pakistan's theory of, bleed India through 1,000 cuts, correct? So that is guerrilla warfare or sub-conventional warfare. To conventional, to nuclear, to CBRN, that is biological weapons also, like what China has displayed now, this Wuhan virus case. So CBRN, chemical, biological, radiology, and nuclear, correct? So you have to be ready for all that. Now coming to I have taken some time to give you a background, what is expected out of Air Force, what sort of threat to be, and what we need to have capabilities. Now, as far as capabilities of the Indian Air Force is concerned, I've been seeing for 43 years now. And earlier also I was, my father was in the Air Force, but as a child I saw. Now closely as an officer, for 43 years I've seen the Air Force. We have come a long, long way. When I joined, we were, primitive aircraft, primitive at that, compared to now, but that time they were state of the art, you can say, or this thing. But they used to have gun threat, gun tactics, fight, combat used to be, close combat like Top Gun. And now where have we reached? We have reached a BVR, this thing, we're talking about 5th generation aircraft, platforms. So if I have to give you an example of various capabilities, how they evolved, the platforms, as I said, they're packed with computing power. The performance is very high into the unstable regime. Okay, they can carry on multi roles. Actually, now the Rafale which has come in has got omni role. I can explain what is multi and omni and swing roles sometime later. Weapons, look at weapons. We have precision weapons with very large standoff capability from far away, fire and forget. Smart weapons. If you say air defense, in earlier days, 40 years back, there used to be small umbrella working in isolation. Now we got a whole India covered in a big umbrella in a networked environment. I may be sitting in Mysore like you are and controlling an aircraft which is flying in Srinagar against an aircraft which is getting airborne from adversaries' land. So it has become active defense where you're taking the fight into the enemy territory. That is how AD has progressed. If you see combat support aircraft, AWAC and AWACS, eyes in the sky, controlling, in the air, God's eye view, providing situational awareness, correct? And you have refueler aircraft. So what has happened? The reach has increased. You can reach till Malacca Strait without, with multiple and beyond. We are going for ferries and international exercises with 2 or 3 refuelings in between without landing anywhere. Then you see the networking in 3 dimensions, air to air, air to ground, and ground to air. All 3 network together and network with other sister services. So the whole networked environment, electronics, avionics, self-protection suites, survivability equipment. The whole air warfare capability has changed. And Indian Air Force has progressed quite well with it. Although numerically we are a bit less as far as fighter aircraft are concerned, and also combat support aircraft are concerned. So capability-wise, technology-wise, we are advanced quite a bit, but numbers-wise, we need to work a little bit more. And before I move on, and let me take one more minute, Adi, very important thing which I want to cover. This capability building in technology infusion. The Air Force is a very, very technology-intensive service.
Yes.
Okay. I keep giving an example that you can walk or run, that is, move on ground without technology. A man can even swim in water without technology, but man cannot fly without technology. Am I right? So technology intensive service, that is one. Secondly, the gestation period is very long for converting this technology into capability. It's a long process. We can have a discussion on that also sometime. And third is, it's a continuous process. It's not that one time you infuse technology and that's the end of it. No, you have to be continuous process. So the moral of the story is capability building is not a one-time exercise. It is a continuous process. I think I'll stop here for you to maybe go on to your next discussion. And so I thought I'll give you a little bit extra background so that, clarity is there that what are we expected out of us and what sort of environment are we working and what capability do we need.
Yeah. So what comes out of your talk, and when you read the 1965 and 71 air war stories, things were pretty much simpler. There were much less radars. There were visual observations and stuff like that. Today, it is a highly technologically advanced gambit where I think day-to-day advances would be, going from one level to the other, and one would have to keep up with it. But I'm really glad to hear you say the fact that the Air Force is very technologically capable, although maybe short in numbers, but our technology levels are world standard. So that's very nice to hear, sir. Sir, looking at, since you also mentioned the China standoff, I'd like to bring in a question. Every expert that came out and spoke about this China standoff mentioned the fact that the air power would be a decisive factor, the kingmaker, as per se, in this conflict. Um, One can understand to a certain extent, but even with the numbers that we carry, how would you like to explain this to our audience, sir?
Very valid question, Adi, and I'm lucky to been following China for quite some time because of my appointments, as I was mentioning earlier. I was AOC JNK, so I was looking after Ladakh area against China border. Then I came at DG Air Operations, so I looked after the entire operation. So once again, China was a major uh, adversity to follow. Then I was lucky enough to go into Eastern Sector when Doklam happened. So I got very experience in Chuma, Doklam, and now this last 1 year activity, Galwan. And actually, we keep saying Galwan, but Galwan was only one part. I mean, he was belligerent and aggressive all over, in all the sectors, and especially in Ladakh, but also in center, as well as central sector, as well as eastern sector. So you're right. A lot of analysis took place in the beginning of it, that how do we compare the two militaries, how do we compare the two air forces. A lot of discussions took place in that also. And media also went berserk. And let me tell you, the media analysis is very, very simplistic. These many number of platforms, these many number of weapons, these many number of this thing, there's a third generation, that is fourth generation. It's not so simple here. When you compare the load of factors which come in, the HR, the training part, the tactics, the strategy, how battle hardened are you? What sort of experience do you have? There are a whole lot of factors. You may have latest state of the art technology, but you may not have the experience to use it. You may not have converted into a proper capability. You may not have integrated with your strategy, doctrine, or tactics. So there are a lot of factors into it. So moral of the story is, we can go on into that discussion as well. But moral of the story is, somewhere they are ahead, somewhere we are ahead. But they are plugging all the gaps and they are marching ahead at a very rapid pace. That is the bottom line. Now, coming to the proper question, how does the air power make a difference? Yeah, Air Force, the air power does a lot in these. These are not visible in the media. Generally, all the boots on ground and the army, this thing comes in rightly smooth. But Air Force is always there. So, I'll just give you a few examples, even in this latest standoff or latest encounter or latest whatever you want to say. So, firstly, starting with mobilization. When these sort of things take place, you need to rapidly mobilize. That means you need to take forces into the hot areas as soon as possible. That is where Air Force comes in. Heavy lift capability, taking the troops, taking the equipment, taking the weapons. And so that is where mobilization comes in. Okay. And or also most important is inter-valley troop transfer. What is that? See, in these high altitude areas, you need acclimatization. Now, if you take a Johnny or a soldier from ground, from the plains, you can't deploy him and expect him to start fighting at 15,000 or 18,000, 20,000 feet. So you need acclimatization, which may take as much as 10 to 14 days. So what do? You transfer already acclimatized troops from one place to the other. That is where Air Force comes in, especially in the hilly mountainous terrain. If he goes by road, he'll take 3 days. If he goes by air, he'll be there within 1 hour or 2 hours, or whatever it is, or half an hour. So that is and in this thing also, when with the mobilization, the way we took it jointly between Army and Air Force, I think the whole world was surprised at how fast have we mobilized. And it has been acknowledged by all the chiefs that this mobilization was a classic example of speed with which we mobilized, and even the adversary was taken aback that how we mobilized so fast. Correct? And a system is followed where hub and spoke method is followed. The heavy aircraft, and we got good heavy lift capability now. IL-76 were there earlier, then we have added C-17s, we have added C-130s, then we added in the helicopter section Chinooks, and we have a good fleet of Mi-17s. So we follow hub and spoke method, where you take heavy equipment, fixed wing aircraft for 80 tons, 40 tons capability from one place to the airfield which is in that area, and from there through helicopters you take it to smaller places or the other area and helipads where it is required. So that is mobilization. Second comes, okay, you're taking those troops. How do you sustain them then? Suddenly you increase the number of strength from say 10 times now or 5 times. Now what do they eat? How do they sustain? You need all those. And they wouldn't have stocked it. They would have stocked according to whatever the earlier strength was. So you have to sustain them. That is called air maintenance. You take supplies, you take food, you take equipment, you take their ammunition, you take their, so that is sustenance. Then comes your increasing the, once the troops have settled down and everything, then comes the situational awareness part. That is where Air Force again comes in. You know, the recce part. You know, you have a lot of assets, tactical asset, recce assets, as well as strategic assets, where you fly these missions and gather the enemy information and build up the whole picture and share it with the need-to-know basis. So, situational awareness. Then comes basically now the shadow boxing starts. Long drawn-out affair. So that is where the term coined is strategic coercion. So strategic coercion, everyone does it. Okay, and this also, if you notice in the media, a whole lot of things used to come up. Okay, LCA is flying there, then Su-30s are flying there, MiG-29 is flying there, Rafale has been sent there, Chinooks are flying there, Apaches are flying there. If you remember in those days, you know, media, every day it used to come out in the social media as well as print media as well as television media, correct? So that is what is that strategic coercion. That means you're showing your muscle power. That if you meddle with me, I'm ready, I will use all this. So it has got two parts to it. One is posturing. Posturing is deploying. Okay, that is what I just covered. And second is, I call it aerial muscle flexing. Now, deployed is fine. Now you visibility also there. You start flying missions. You know, start flying particular types of missions, indicating that I'm ready. I'm going to fly these missions and I'm going to use them against you. So that is next part of it. Okay, then military diplomacy, as I covered earlier. You know, you're sending signals. Okay, you know, enemy is my friend. Okay, so you start on the military diplomacy part. I think I'll not cover more than that. Then the most important part is, which is not visible, is the IAF provides various options to the decision-making body. Decision-making body at very high level, that what is to be done by and what can be. So the Air Force provides, all military provides, but Air Force can give you a very, very wide spectrum of choices. You know, various shades from one end of spectrum to the other. One of the end spectrum is rap on the knuckle, and the other end of the spectrum is punch on the nose. And in between various shades, 8 or 9 shades. How do you decide now what to target? What number of targets to use, to address? Okay, with how much area to cover, whether restricted in one area or like Kargil, I'll give you an example. We said, okay, we'll fight only in Kargil sector. So that is a bit of a restriction. You're not opening up other. Then Kargil also, I'll give an example, whether to cross or not to cross. Correct? So depending on all these, you know, you give various shades of options to the decision maker. Okay, that is the biggest thing. Keeping in mind the Air Force flexibility, reach, and the quick reaction traits of the Air Force and the air power. So this is how I've given you a few examples of how does our air power become effective and utilized in these situations.
I think one of the things that one can see right now, and the general public will be able to actually see it, is the heavy lift capability that is being used during the COVID crisis. I am sure what you told us about how the troops are actually moved there is something that people wouldn't have realized because it was not really seen. And yes, people did see those, you know, the Sukhoi is taking off from Leh airfield and this and that. It did. It's one thinks about it, it's more than. It's actually optics which is creating a certain narrative, which is very interesting, sir. So, you know, as per, I'd like to take you to your own experience. You've flown a Jaguar, which is a strike aircraft. One thing at my, and correct me if I'm wrong, sir, India lacks a strategic bombing capability. That is something that comes out of it when you look at just the types of aircraft. We've got multi-role aircraft that can do bombing as well, but a strategic bomber is something that will, it's on a totally different level altogether. Our adversary in China has a strategic bomber. They've got a long-range bomber that they've been, that they actually showed up during the Ladakh time. Also, the mention of this bomber had come up. Do you think it's high time that India also looks at a strategic bomber in their scenario? The last one we had was probably the Canberra or something like that, and beyond that, we've not seen this. What are your opinions, sir?
Yeah, very pertinent observation and question. But let me ask you a personal question, Adi, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Your mustache pattern, are you been impressed by Abhinandan?
Well, sir, the side flick, yes.
The lighter vein. Anyway, coming back to your more serious strategic bomber, the answer is NAP. Now, what is NAP? You must be wondering. Okay, the question is, you're right. Your observation was very right that China has it and H6, and they like I talked about strategic coercion in Doklam also. You noticed, they will bring in the strategic bomber ahead in front of the front airfields. Okay, and in open so that you can see them. Okay, that is posturing. Okay, then second thing they used to do is whenever there was an important meeting going to take place, they'll again bring the aircraft forward. That is aerial muscle flexing, backing it up. We're talking from position of strength. That is what Chinese do. They admire, they respect strength. Okay, I've written on my blog also a series on China. How does the Chinese brain work? So if somebody is interested, they can go through my blog. And coming back to your strategic bomber question, very, very pertinent question. So I said the answer is NAP. So what is NAP? NAP is need, affordability, and priority. Okay. So what is need? I will tell you about need. Now, if you see, which all countries do have strategic bombers at the moment? USA?
Yes.
Russia? Yes. What is common? They all have global aspirations. Correct? So for global aspirations, you need to have an expeditionary capability. And if you're going away from your motherland and if you're going from away, expeditionary capability, you should have a capability where you can drop or you can lot of tonnage onto the enemy, and that is one part of it. Correct? I'm not commenting on that we don't have aspirations of global aspirations or regional aspirations or those things. I'm not getting into that realm. But do we have that kind of ambitions? No, I don't think so. And that is one. So need. Second is in future, I am not sure. Okay. Second is affordability. Can we afford it? We have this debate going on gun versus butter. Where do we spend more, on development or on the military? And we have learned a lesson harder way. I think in last 1 year, if you have not learned the lesson, I think we'll have mud on our face in future. I hope you have learned a lesson. We need to spend money on this thing. Even for development, you have to have a strong army. In your house, personal house, even in the games which we play, all the games, I'm not talking about the games which countries play, I'm talking about the children or in the family, all these Monopoly and others, you always see the person who's weaker, his property gets taken away. Same thing applies here. But affordability, costly asset, can we buy it at the moment? Okay. Then not only the asset, when you buy this asset, it's such a heavy bomber, it needs protection. It needs conducive aerospace environment to fly in. All right. It's like Navy carrier. A carrier needs another 6 or 8 ships along with it. But its own protection. And if one bomber or carrier goes down, you can imagine what will be the effect on the morale of that country. So it's a costly effort. Can we afford it? Third is a priority. At the moment, that is the most important part. We have at the moment gaps in our capability which we need to fill in and which need higher priority. If you ask me as far as air power is concerned, I will put priority as highest priority to the fighter strength. You've been hearing 42 strength is authorized and we have 30 and all that. Then combat support aircraft. Do we have adequate? No. AWACS, refuelers. We need more. Weapons. Okay, we have a good inventory quality-wise, but we need quantity also. Unmanned platforms, UAVs, armed platforms, UCAVs, swarms, those are on priority. Electronic warfare and survivability systems on higher priority. Then network systems on priority. Infrastructure, some of our areas in the east are totally bare. So we need infrastructure, money to spend on infrastructure. That is on higher priority. Then maybe comes your strategic bomber. Okay, so as I said, bottom line is, firstly, at the moment we don't need it. Even if we want it, we cannot afford it, and we need to priority wise it is fairly low. In future, maybe when we can afford it and we have ambitions and we have the economic strength to fructify our ambitions, maybe we can go in for it. So that is in short my perspective.
That's a very logical way of putting it. So because at the end of it, when the layman looks at it, he says, "Yaar, uske paas hai, mere paas to nahi." It does come into everybody's mind, but that is where a military mind comes into place and says, "Yaar, uske paas hoga, but mere ko abhi zarurat nahi," which is a very, very right thing to do, sir. Sir, one of the things which you mentioned in the first part of your answer is that we could refuel and connect with the Malacca Straits from the mainland of India with the current inventory of aircraft that we've got. And we all know that the Straits of Malacca is one of the biggest choke points that we can enforce upon the Chinese and their trade when the balloon does go up. My question is, sir, we've got and I don't know if you would agree with me, but unsinkable aircraft carriers in terms of the Andaman Islands which are there. Firstly, what do you think about using those islands as a jump-off point? Secondly, is there anything which is being done to create those islands as I said, unsinkable aircraft carriers?
Yeah, very pertinent question, Adi. I should have said this in the beginning. These are my personal views, whatever I have covered so far and whatever I'm going to speak further also. There's nothing to do with the official take of the Air Force, although I'm drawing from my experience, but these are all my personal views. Okay. And information gathered from open media, which I told you last 2 years after retirement, 2 years and 11 days now. I have been heavily into social media and following the media on various geopolitical as well as defense issues. A very pertinent question about island territories and this thing. So, firstly, you have covered yourself the importance of it. The sea lanes of communication, as they call it, SLOC. And I will not go into statistics. Enough statistics is floating around in the media about the trade volume. How much of trade world goes through these sea lanes of communication close to through Indian Ocean, through these choke points, Malacca Straits and Suez Canal and other places and all. How much of oil and energy go through it, and how many countries, what percentage are dependent on this oil and energy. Even China, they are looking at alternate routes for their oil and energy for moving from one place to the other. Okay, so I will not go into this thing. So as far as we are concerned, we have a very, very God-given gift. That is your island territories. Okay, they are close to the Malacca Strait. They are close to the sea lanes of communication, and they are a God-given gift. And he stole the key phrase from me: unsinkable aircraft carrier. Okay, it's a chain of islands which can be developed. And we have developed Andaman Nicobar Command, which has been there for quite some time now, almost 2 decades. Now, before I come to the question proper and answer you on the capabilities of ANC and what we need to do, let me give you a brief about where China is heading. Okay, that will put things in perspective. Now, if you see, China has got expeditionary capability. So in the modernization program of the defense forces, they have realized that the expeditionary capability is best given by the air power and the naval power. Right? If you have to go away from your parent country, what do you go? Navy through the sea and the air power. These are the two things. That's how they invested heavily into this thing. Now see at the Navy. Numerically, I'm told they are gone ahead of USA.
Yes.
Okay. As far as number of ships and platforms are concerned. Look at the aircraft carrier program, how it is progressing. I mean, there are nuclear submarines also combined with it. If you see the aircraft carrier program, it's a success. They're making the indigenous this thing. They're looking for J-15 replacement as a lighter aircraft to operate from carriers. They're looking for a new AWC aircraft carrier-based. They're looking for anti-ship missiles and weapons. They have started night operations from the sea. Okay. On the other hand, now you see their presence in the Indian Ocean region. To counter the piracy problem, they have got a permanent presence in this area. Until 1999, they had nil port visits to other countries. Now they are doing 20 a year. That is a kind of presence in the Indian Ocean. Third thing which they are doing is they are building up support bases. You see what they are doing? Sri Lanka, that base, Avantota. Then your Myanmar, okay. Then Djibouti, Maldives. They're trying to. I mean, they are developing bases where they can get, support, and they can get logistic support. So keeping all this in mind, my analysis is they are working towards almost a 6 aircraft carrier battle group navy. That means 2 fleets, one for the Pacific and one for the Indian Ocean. And they are going to, timeline to my mind is by 2035, another 14 to 15 years. So keeping this in mind, now you see, we have a strategically located island chain. Okay. Generally, people refer to it as Iron Curtain for these sea lines of communication, or the Iron Curtain into the choke points or the straits. Correct? My take is that we should convert that Iron Curtain into Steel Curtain. So what does that mean? That means that we should, strengthen Andaman Nicobar Command. We should give them more muscle. We should position permanent assets, all 3 services, Army, Navy, Air Force. We should build infrastructure to house more and more forces if need be. Not only for the forces which are positioned there. In need comes, pump in more. Okay, we shouldn't. Air Force has already extended the AD umbrella till the islands. We already networked. Okay, so more is required to be done. So also I'll go one step further. That is, my take is that we should make a similar tri-service structure, if not in scale and number, but at least maybe reduce, because the islands are much smaller there, on the western seaboard as well. Okay, that is my personal take. I will digress a little bit here, Adi. You must be hearing a lot about this, CDS and DMA formed, and then the theater command debate, correct? So when I draw my priority list as far as integration changes are required in the 3 services or in the civil and military domain, my highest priority comes to the Andaman Nicobar Command. It's a tri-service organization. It's a theater. We should strengthen it. That is the first. Then comes cyber and space. We should have had a command by now, although we have moved into agency, but we should have had a command by now. Then we should have a maybe joint structure at whatever level, command level, to look into special forces, new technology induction, and communications and networks. Then 4th will be integration of logistics, training, maintenance, and repair. In parallel to all this, we should be looking into more of civil military integration. Then we should go in for maybe theater commands or something. That is my personal take, but I think we are moving in a different direction. I'll not comment on that. Coming back to the subject. Now, as I said, we need to do much more in Andaman Nicobar Command. Much has been done earlier also. And you also mentioned about infrastructure and making composite, places where military can operate and all. Good thing what was done earlier was that it was been all the assets and land which was there in Andaman Nicobar has been, that is defense I'm talking about, has been called as military asset, not belonging to Army, Navy or Air Force. So it doesn't matter. You have an airfield, Navy can also operate from there, Army can also operate from there, Air Force can also. There's no issue. So we need to have much more airfields. We need to have many more radars. We need to have many more air defense weapons. We need to have many more operating enclaves. We need to have much more storage capability for fuel, ammunition, supplies, and others. So we need to increase our infrastructure. Okay, that is what we need to do in our Andaman and Nicobar Command. We are doing it, but there are a lot of challenges. It's far from mainland, and making it all this is not easy. But these challenges can all be overcome if we overcome by perseverance. So we pursue it, and we pursue it with perseverance. I think we can overcome these challenges. So that is my take on the island territories and their importance and the way ahead. Adi?
So that is we've been, so you're basically saying that with the command which is coming up there and the command which is currently existing, of course, and it needs to be re-strengthened for the capability to be expanded, and that is something I think the current scenario has probably pushed it forward by not just a couple of years, but I guess a half a decade. And I hope that that pace remains, wherein we are able to actually develop faster and faster. So I have a whole set of questions for you, which is basically going to be talking about our asset acquisitions and our plans and the capabilities of the future future aircraft which are going to be coming into the Indian Air Force. But of course, we wanted to keep this interview shorter so that our viewers can, one, take a taste of it from here and look for the other one when the time comes to release it. And so I'd like to tell everybody this is just the first part of a two-part episode that we're doing to begin with the Air Marshal, which talks about our air operations and the air power. Now we'll be in the next episode. We will be talking about the asset acquisitions. I'd like to thank you, sir, for sharing the thoughts that you've provided us in this particular talk, and I look forward to connecting with you again for the next talk.
Thank you, Adi. I enjoyed recording this session with you. I also enjoyed it. And let me take one more minute to leave a parting thought with you. We talked about S-6 bomber, strategic bombers, huge aircraft with capability to carry out carpet bombing and take a lot of weapons along with them, correct? A lot of tonnage. The way the air warfare heading now, air warfare. No, we are talking about miniaturization. We're talking about technology related to nanotechnology. We're talking about swarms. We are talking about artificial intelligence. Now, if you have a small platform and the quantum computing, where the small little thing will be packed with computing power, ideal for an airborne platform. Now, a thing which can be done by a very, very small platform, and it can stun the enemy into total numbness. Why have such a big aircraft flying around? Just a thought. And I will go one step even further. If you get into a cyber domain, yesterday only I was reading, one of the oil supply lines of USA has been hacked, and all the oil supply has stopped. All right, and they have a second system of making sure that the oil reaches all the states, 17 states, by road. Okay, now if you can do such a thing without bombing, without even swarm, just by an invisible, a cyber warrior sitting somewhere and doing this, why do you need a S-6 bomber? Maybe in future, just a thought, the same thing can be done by a miniature swarm, or not even a swarm, by a cyber warrior, long-haired, a geek and a computer wizard sitting somewhere and doing all sort of things. Just a thought. And thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
Interesting of you to bring it up. So I think that's a very valid point. And the clamor today is about armed drones and stuff like that. So the world is moving in a totally different direction. Agree with you 100%, sir. Thank you so much for this talk, sir. And I'll see you again for our next round of discussions.
Thank you. Thank you very much.